Reference emissions levels are the reference point from which you begin counting how much emissions reductions you've been able to achieve. Reference emissions levels set up the counterfactual of how much emissions would have occurred in the absence of activities to reduce the emissions. So it's a little complicated to set up because it is exactly that. It's the counterfactual. It's something that did not happen. But you also want to set it up in a transparent way that everybody can agree upon. So it has to be, it's some part negotiation, some part technical determination of what would be a reasonable deforestation level and what would be a reasonable emissions level if you did not have deforestation, or if you had business as usual with no reduction in deforestation.
So to work it out, it's both a practical and a political consideration?
Exactly. There's a technical side to it, you know, detecting what are the historical deforestation rates, how much deforestation has happened in the past, what have been the key causes of it, what do you expect about the key causes or the drivers of deforestation in the future. Do you expect, you know, prices to increase of agricultural commodities? Do you expect mining to be expanded? Do you expect oil palm to expand? Do you expect oil palm to stagnate and slow down the expansion of area planted? So that's sort of the technical side, but then everybody has to agree upon it, because there are groups that fund it and there are groups that receive the money and that agree to undertake a set of activities against an expected return. So that's where the negotiation comes in.
Why is it so difficult to do something like set these reference levels?
Well, the difficulty really is in this element that it's counterfactual. It's something that did not happen. So how do you know, under normal circumstances, without much variation in the economy, you could certainly expect, you know, the last 5 years to be a good predictor of the next 5 years. But nobody expected the financial crisis, for example. Nobody could predict these big changes, these inflection points. And that's where things get a bit difficult. You know, if you go through a financial crisis and the returns to land decrease, you would expect a strong reduction in conversion of forested area. If you get a price spike, if food prices go up, you would expect agricultural land to expand. And so predicting some of these flash points, or these points where there are major changes and that cause inflections in your deforestation rate is very difficult. And that's where things get a little complicated.
And how have you figured out a way to address these challenges?
Well, we started with, we put together what we call a stepwise approach, and the stepwise approach really is data-driven. So one of the problems is we're trying to do this in countries that don't have good deforestation data. They don't understand how much, they don't have good data on how much forest they currently have, what have been the deforestation rates. So we lay out some ways to get started. There are data sets out there that everyone has access to. They have problems, everybody knows what the problems is, but at least they're data sets and they are consistent over time. You can start with that and set out your reference emissions level, but then what we did was we laid out pathways to improve that. So how would we go about improving our estimates of the area that's deforested? You know, through satellite imagery, through moving from non-spatially explicit to more spatially explicit types of approaches. How would we go about improving our emissions estimate? Because, you know, it's not just about the area that's deforested, it's how much carbon is held in the trees on that area that's deforested, and that varies. You know, a forest at the top of a mountain or a forest at sea level, a tropical rainforest or a dry forest all have different carbon contents. So we've set out a pathway of how do you go from very basic information to getting more complete information so that you get better estimates, more accurate estimates, and less bias, so you can improve the precision as well as the accuracy. And then we've tied that to the different phases in which countries need to go through as they set up a REDD program. Countries go through what's called a readiness phase, then they go through a demonstration activity and learning phase, and then they go to a full-scale implementation phase. And so we laid out, you know, how the different levels of collecting these types of data, the deforestation data, the carbon content data, the carbon density data, how that would actually change from when you're going through a readiness phase to when you're moving into a demonstration activity phase to when you move up to full-scale compensation for emissions reductions. You know, how would you increase your certainty? How would you decrease your bias? So it's really aimed at helping countries get started now with what they've got, but then laying out the pathway for getting from where countries are now to where they need to be active in a compliance mechanism. You can get started right now. Every country could get started with the approach that we put together now. They could use globally available data. They could use tier 1 factors from the IPCC, which are available on the web. Any country can access them. And so they can put together an emissions scenario, a reference scenario now, and then they would know which steps they need to do to improve that, so they can get better certainty if they improve area estimates, or they can get better certainty if they improve carbon density estimates.
What's the incentive for them to get better certainty?
Nothing yet. The incentive is going to come when money is on the table, right? And that's one of the things that's missing right now in the negotiations. And that's one of the reasons that the countries aren't moving so fast on this. Right now everything is in the readiness phase. There's no long-term certainty of funding for REDD. And that's one of the things that our research is showing is a major impediment to REDD moving forward. Demonstration projects are being set up, but they're not scaling up because they have no certainty of long-term funding, right? The problem isn't spending the money that's available right now. In fact, there's maybe almost countries are having problems spending the money that's available right now. But they're having problems because they're not ready to invest in institution building, in capacity building, in some of these long-term things that are required, because the long-term certainty of REDD is just not, of REDD financing is just not there. So Indonesia is making good progress. They're putting in place a national carbon accounting system with the support of the Australians, with the support of Norwegians. The Americans are working with them as well. And there's a lot of technical support coming in from outside. And the reason that they're doing that is because there is money on the table here. Norway has put $1 billion on the table and said, here's what we're willing to put up to get things moving. The Australians have put some money up. Other countries are looking at Indonesia and saying, we're interested in investing. Let's see what you can do with the money you've got. So we are seeing national carbon accounting systems being put in place. We're seeing reference emissions levels being debated right now, and the country's going through the exercises to begin making its estimates.
How confident are you that this stepwise approach will be taken up internationally?
Well, the stepwise approach has already been accepted in the texts of the UNFCCC. It was accepted in Durban. The stepwise approach was specifically mentioned in the decision about how to set reference emissions levels. And now we're seeing the stepwise approach in the draft text that came out of the negotiations that just happened a couple of months ago in Bonn. And these are the decisions that will come out in Doha. So it's still in brackets, it's still not fully accepted, but they're talking about a stepwise approach to measurement, reporting, and verification, which is certainly the next step beyond what we're doing, or what we're suggesting already from the reference emissions levels.
And you're obviously hoping that this will be something that gets...
I think it's a useful approach. If countries don't find it useful, then it's fine that they pick up another system. But I think, the nice thing about it is it's solutions oriented. It says, here's how you get started, and here's some of the next steps that you would want to go down to begin to improve your estimates. So to the extent that countries find it useful, and to the extent that it allows everybody to get in the game early, I think that it's a positive thing. But as I say, this is our suggestion, and something that we've actually demonstrated can work through our research. If countries find it useful, then that's all the better.
And setting these reference levels, is that a key step for REDD to work?
Certainly. Getting reference emissions levels set is the first step, because now a country can go to another country and say, okay, we think our emissions levels are this, and they're going to be this for the next 5 years. Let's talk about what sort of compensation we can get for, and we can talk about what types of emissions reductions we're ready to commit to. So it sets the benchmark from which the international negotiations can happen both on the finance side, but also on the emissions reduction side. Right? It's the first step.